do better, Big Mouth? Huh? You think you can do better? Huh? Drop some I don't know.
Well, let's find out, huh?
Maybe some other time.
There is no other time.
So whatever problems Mr. Miyagi has with your uncle, they don't have to be ours. Yeah.
Oh, we have our own, huh?
Hey, Kumiko, where you going?
You go nowhere. Call my uncle. You take a bet. Yes! I give 3-1, eh?
What? No, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
You have a choice. Broken ice or broken neck.
Hi, welcome to Around the World in 80s Movies. My name is Vince Leo. I'm the author of the film review website, Quipster.net. I've been doing film reviews since 1996. You can read all of my written work there. Quipster.net is where to go, QWIPSTER.net. While you're there, I do encourage you to check out the other podcast that I do that covers films of the 1990s, as well as newer films that are based on somehow spin-offs from or sequels to movies from the 1990s. It's called To the 90s and Beyond. You can find the link to that at my website, Quipster.net. Today, we're going to get into the second part of this three-part look at the Karate Kid films from the 1980s. Obviously, they continued on into the 90s, and really, there's a new movie coming out this year at the time of this recording, 2025, so it continues going, but anything after the third one will be on To the 90s and Beyond. So if you haven't subscribed to that, I do encourage you to do that. But we're not quite there yet. We have Karate Kid Part 2, which is the film I'm going to be covering here on this episode. From 1986, Karate Kid Part 2 is a PG-rated film. It does have violence and language. The runtime is 1 hour and 53 minutes. It brings back, of course, Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita. But newcomers, Danny Kamekona, Tanlyn Tomita, Yuji Okamoto, Nobu McCarthy, and Charlie Tanimoto. The director is the same one as with Karate Kid, John G. Avildsen, and also returning is the screenwriter, Robert Mark Kamen. Now, discussions about a sequel to The Karate Kid, as I mentioned in my previous episode, it began after the film's positive test screenings, before the film ever came out in the theater. And screenwriter Robert Mark Kamen, he started developing a concept. And he thought the concept for the second film should be Mr. Miyagi returns to Okinawa, and there he will rekindle a lost love and also settle an old score. And the reason why Kamen wanted to set his next film in Okinawa is because he desired to visit his Goju-Ryu sensei, Seikichi Toguchi. So he needed an excuse to go over there as much as possible to do the research and as well as do the film, hopefully, there as well. Columbia Pictures funded Kamen's trip to do that research. Some executives did grumble about this idea, though. They were concerned about the costs of doing location shooting in Japan, and one in particular thought that audience interest in a film filled with predominantly brown characters was not going to be something that could sell as well as if they brought back the original cast, which is what they wanted to do. They argued that maybe they should just continue to set the films in the Los Angeles region. Maybe the next one could focus on a feud between John Kreese and Mr. Miyagi. But Kamen decided he was going to reach a compromise here. He was going to start the film off, maybe the first third. He will start the film off with that confrontation. He had planned to have that confrontation actually as the ending to the first Karate Kid, but it was never filmed because John Avildsen thought it was just probably superfluous. After Daniel wins the match, that's where he thought the film would end on a high. So this confrontation between Miyagi and Kreese, that's really not the high they were looking for. And in that scene, Miyagi, he intervenes. He stops Kreese from abusing Johnny and the other Cobra Kai contestants in the parking lot after the tournament. After you see this scene, you would then have the story continue on with some of Daniel's life here in Reseda. You would see him and his mother, Lucille, a scene with him and his girlfriend, Allie, and that was before they eventually head to Okinawa. Kamen began the sequel script in September of 1984, just 3 months after the first film's release. He started filling in Mr. Miyagi's background, basing a lot of his character history on his own karate instructors from Okinawa. Within a month, he had completed his first 114-page draft. Kamen's first draft opens in that parking lot scene, as I just mentioned, reminiscent of the original ending of the first Karate Kid, but this time he introduces a new element to tie in what happens at the beginning to what we're going to see to set up the Okinawa trip. An Asian American man named Webster Miyagi. He's from Sherman Oaks. He's dressed in all American clothes, but he approaches Mr. Miyagi with his 5-year-old son Dexter, and they ask, maybe they have some sort of possible family connection because they have the same last name. And despite their name and seemingly a striking resemblance to Mr. Miyagi, he denies any kind of relation. In fact, he's very uncomfortable with the whole conversation. Webster decides he's going to take a picture of Mr. Miyagi, and he mentions he's going to consult his aunt in Okinawa about maybe if she knows of any potential connection. The story then jumps to Daniel and Allie's high school graduation, and about 6 months from that tournament, Allie receives, as a gift from her wealthy parents, a trip to Paris for the entire summer. And given that she's going to be departing soon after the summer to go to college, she reluctantly decides that she should probably just break up with Daniel because they're not really going to see each other that much after graduation, and that leaves him heartbroken. So during the summer, Daniel continues hanging out with Mr. Miyagi. He continues his karate training. We see a scene where Mr. Miyagi takes Daniel to the batting cages to improve his reflexes by practicing dodging auto-pitched fastballs. Meanwhile, Lucille, Daniel's mother, announces that she's going to be heading to Chicago for an entire month because of corporate training that would be tied into a promotion, so she can't really miss it. Mr. Miyagi then offers Daniel a place to stay in this guest bedroom that they were building through the summer. Later, Webster visits Mr. Miyagi and he reveals that he is indeed a distant relative of Mr. Miyagi, and he hands him a telegram about his ailing father in Okinawa. And feeling the need to honor his father, Mr. Miyagi prepares to return home. And meanwhile, Daniel, facing the prospect of living an entire month in a lonely hotel room in Chicago where he doesn't know anybody while his mother does her training, he decides he's going to accompany Mr. Miyagi to Okinawa instead. And during the flight, the inquisitive Daniel starts learning about Mr. Miyagi's past, about his childhood best friend, Seikichi Toguchi. Here came in borrowing the name of his real-life sensei. Seikichi also learned karate from Miyagi's father. And Daniel also hears about Yukio, Miyagi's lost love. The story brings up a lot of painful memories for Mr. Miyagi, leaving him very uncomfortable and not willing to tell the whole story. When they finally land, Yukio and her granddaughter, Kumiko, meet them at the airport. Seikichi, unhappy about Miyagi's return, secretly watches with his grandson, Chosen. Mr. Miyagi visits his sick father, who calls him, we've finally learned Mr. Miyagi's first name, Chojun. Here, Robert Mark Kamen naming him Mr. Miyagi directly after the founder of the Goju-ryu karate style, Chojun Miyagi. Tragically, then, Miyagi's father dies in his arms. The story eventually reveals a love triangle that existed between Miyagi and Seikichi and Yukio. 40 years ago, this love triangle split the friends, leading to Miyagi's departure, Seikichi feeling very dishonored. Daniel is starting to learn about Miyagi's past in this love triangle. He's entering into kind of a triangle of his own between himself and Kumiko, as well as Chozen, culminating in a showdown between Daniel and Chozen for the film's climactic confrontation. Now, director John Avildsen, he hesitated to return for a sequel to The Karate Kid because he felt that it really was not going to be as much of a high as the first time around. He also, after reading Kamen's script, was concerned specifically about the excessive violent tone of the feature that he felt was kind of in contradiction with a lot of what he knew about karate being a defensive art. He pointed out specifically a scene in which Daniel intentionally blinds an opponent by raking his fingers across the opponent's eyes, and he felt that that was inconsistent with Miyagi's teachings. Avildsen also hated a subplot in which Chozen and his gang kidnapped Kumiko, believing it was far too heavy-handed, and he had previously moved a near-rape scene that Kamen had from the original Karate Kid intended for Allie. Kamen said he was open to working with Avildsen to change whatever it is in the script that he didn't like, and with Columbia Pictures offering a substantial amount of money, Avildsen humorously noted that a director's integrity has a direct line to his checking account. Avildsen did agree to return to direct Karate Kid Part 2 if Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita were on board. Now, Macchio's involvement was much more assured because he did sign a contract clause that included 2 sequels if they wanted to make it. Morita did not have that clause in his contract, and he was initially hesitant because he did dislike, to some degree, the early script by Kamen, but after learning that Avildsen and Macchio were going to be returning, he didn't want to be the sole stick in the mud, so he decided he was going to come back if they were. Over the next year, Kamen continuously revised his script. He continued working on it right up to a week before filming was to begin. He felt that the unexpressed love between Miyagi and Yukie was a central element of the story that could not change, but the rest could change. For instance, the character's name changed from Yukio to Yukiya at some point, and finally to Yukie, which happened to also be the name of Pat Morita's wife. Maybe it was just a little easier for him to remember. This can be a little bit confusing because if you remember from the Karate Kid, the first film, Yukie is also the name of the woman that Miyagi mourns after losing her during childbirth in the Karate Kid. I guess we presume there were 2 different Yukies around the same time. Very confusing, I think, to a lot of people who are really kind of digging into Miyagi's past. Kamen changed Yukie to being, instead of having a granddaughter, she actually was always unmarried, seemingly never having engaged in any kind of romantic relationship since Miyagi left. Seikichi, angered by Miyagi's interference in his arranged marriage to Yukie, also remains unmarried as we see him, channeling his energy into becoming a crime boss on the island, becoming a big deal there. Later, drafts saw Kamen change Seikichi's name to Sato, because presumably he didn't want to dishonor his beloved sensei's name by attaching it to such a corrupt character. Chosen then became Sato's nephew, Kumiko became Yuki's niece, and Kamen felt that this love story would highlight a lot of the deep emotions beneath traditional Japanese stoicism that we know about. Avildsen and his son Jonathan, as well as other key crew members, traveled to Okinawa to explore filming options and locations there. Some scholars from Okinawa International University guided this team on a tour of dojos and remote islands, including the specific dojo where Kamen trained, which also inspired the story's entire setting. However, they chose not to film in Okinawa in the end because frequent typhoons had taken place there, and the landscape seemed to be marked by an absence of a lot of lush greenery. Avildsen wanted a romanticized storybook village of where Miyagi is from, and the only thing that they really saw standing was cement bunker-like buildings remaining after a lot of those recent storms. Now, Pat Morita, he happened to be a stand-up comedian for quite a long time in Hawaii. He suggested that the filmmakers should consider the islands of Hawaii for their project, not only because they very closely resembled what he was seeing in Okinawa, but it would be a lot easier in terms of travel. There was consistent sunshine there. They didn't have to worry so much about the typhoons, and the scenic beauty was in abundance. So they looked around in Hawaii and they discovered a fish pond in Kahalu on Oahu's eastern coast that they loved specifically for its unique look as well as its accessibility. Now, it happened to be on private property, but they ended up being allowed to film there thanks to Pat Morita's friendship with State Senator Duke Kawasaki, who happened to be an associate of Dr. Raymond Yap, who was a retired Honolulu doctor as well as a commercial land developer who owned the 43-acre site that they wanted to film on. The production carried a budget of $14 million. Production designer William J. Cassidy and art director William P. Matthews spent 2 months creating this Okinawan village set featuring 7 thatched houses, a Shinto shrine, and a lot of imitation coral rock. The $800,000 set was inaugurated specifically with a Shinto dedication ceremony, as if it was real. Warner Brothers Burbank Studios provided the interiors of a lot of these places, as well as some additional exteriors, including a street scene from Naha City and an ancient castle where the Bon Odori dance and the film's climactic fight will occur. Now, in the completed film, after all of the changes that had been made, we now start with the highlights from the original Karate Kid, followed by that scene where Miyagi confronts Kreese in the parking lot after the All Valley Karate Tournament. Kreese humiliates Johnny for losing, but Miyagi defends Johnny, humiliating Kreese in return, choosing to show mercy by not finishing him off there. The subplot involving Webster Miyagi is wholly removed from the final script. Pat Morita happened to be somebody who was thrilled that the scene between Kreese and Miyagi, that showdown, was revisited. Fans would often come up to him and say they really, really wanted to see him kick Kreese's butt in the first film, but they were denied, and he had to mention, actually, that was supposed to happen, but they decided not to film it. Now, Martin Kove, who plays John Kreese, he probably regretted it somewhat, because in the scene, Kreese is supposed to punch at Miyagi. Miyagi dodges, and that causes Kreese's fist to go through a car window. Now, Kove says that the window that was supposed to break before his punch lands did not actually break because the effects technician didn't trigger it in time, and that resulted in Kove's hand making contact with the fake glass that still caused small pieces of the glass embedded in his arm and his hand. Pat Morita suggested that Mr. Miyagi would show mercy. He would mock squeeze John Kreese's nose to make a honking noise, and he actually came up with that idea during rehearsals as they were going to film it for the first film. He decides to continue that here. Pat Morita, known for a lot of playful, very juvenile humor, and he believed that this would add a touch of humiliation for Kreese that was somehow worse than being physically whooped by Miyagi. Now, as far as Daniel's girlfriend, Allie, she was entirely written out of the story for the finished film. Elizabeth Shue's agent demanded too much money for what would have been a very brief appearance. It's revealed in the film that Allie had some sort of breakup with Daniel off screen because she wanted to date a football player. She also happened to have damaged Daniel's precious car. So kind of Allie was bad news, I guess, to make us not miss her. It happened to be later, Ralph Macchio, the actor, encountered Elizabeth Shue sometime later at a Mets game. And she expressed her frustration to him then that her character leaving Daniel for some jock was kind of the wrong choice, and she was a little bit miffed about that. In fact, in Cobra Kai, the TV series based off of all of these characters and situations from the original Karate Kid movies, she actually appears on the show at some point, and the breakup was reinterpreted to indicate that Daniel happened to misunderstand the situation with Allie and the football player. He was just a friend, and he assumed that they were an item, and he should not have broken up with her. Lucille, Daniel's mother, also does not come back. She has no on-screen part. She's written to be moving to Fresno. We never see her on the screen, and that allows Daniel to room with Miyagi. And when Miyagi must fly to Okinawa, Daniel decides to use some of his college savings to buy a ticket to join Miyagi by surprise. Now, Sato, once Mr. Miyagi's childhood best friend, is now his sworn enemy due to Miyagi's failure to honor Sato's arranged marriage to Yukie, who was in love with Miyagi at the time, mutually in love. After leaving Okinawa before the wedding, Miyagi left their feud unresolved for 45 years, but never in the heart of Sato. He kept that fire burning all that time for the disrespect he felt at losing that marriage. Now, during their time there in Okinawa, Daniel ends up confronting Chozen, Sato's troublesome nephew, who, along with Sato, destroys local farms and gardens vital to Okinawa's economy. Additionally, Sato's company, they have overfished the waters, threatening the community's primary source of income, and now they're destroying the secondary source of income for many people, which is their farming. Now, Pat Morita kind of took some time to regain Mr. Miyagi's patterns, his speech, his character, because of a lot of these new character developments. So he had to grow a lot and show a lot more facets than he did the first time around. He did perform his own karate moves for Karate Kid Part 2, but the training took a long time. In fact, it took him 4 days just to perfect a high kick. Morita, he very much enjoyed working with Ralph Macchio again. He considered them very much professional friends. He was kind, and he was always on the mark. He also performed stand-up comedy when they were not filming, often arriving on set. Unfortunately, Pat Morita was known as being pretty much an alcoholic, and is one of the reasons why he passed away earlier than he should. He would often come to the set very tired, hungover from those late nights. Veteran actress Nobu McCarthy, she plays Yukie, Miyagi's old flame. She first auditioned with Avildsen at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Then she came in and worked alongside Ralph Macchio to test their chemistry. Interestingly, if you follow the history of these actors, Nobu McCarthy also portrayed Pat Morita's fiancée in another context. She was Arnold Takahashi's Japanese pen pal fiancée in the episode of Happy Days called Arnold's Wedding. Of course, Arnold being Pat Morita. Tanlyn Tomita, who plays Kumiko, she makes her film debut here. She happened to be a student at UCLA studying mass communication and British and Japanese history. She was intending to become a history teacher one day. Tomita was actually born in Okinawa to a Japanese-American father as well as an Okinawan Filipino mother, but she grew up since pretty much infancy in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles. At a Japanese-American beauty contest, a woman named Helen Funai, she was an assistant to the casting director of Karate Kid Part 2. She worked with the organizer of the beauty pageant to submit Tanlyn as well as other top contestants to attend a casting call for Karate Kid 2. Despite having no formal acting experience, Tomita was considered very appealing to the casting team. She had a very natural likability and a spunk that set herself apart from all of the other people who were vying for the role. Funai managed Tanlyn during 6 weeks of auditions at Tanlyn's father's request. The director, John Avildsen, he admired Tomita's determination, especially when she arrived at the very first audition he saw her in a traditional kimono. He thought that she had a lot of spirit to be doing that. Tomita received acting lessons on the set from her co-stars daily. She found Ralph Macchio very quiet and serious, but he was very instrumental in showing her how to act as well as to do some dancing. Later on, they have a dance sequence together. While Pat Morita was very free-spirited and easygoing with his advice. Nobu McCarthy, though, in particular, became her on-set mentor, and she kind of mentored her throughout her acting career until McCarthy passed away in 2002. Danny Kamekona, he was a native Hawaiian actor and a longtime friend of Pat Morita's. They met while Morita was filming the 1976 movie Midway in Hawaii. Morita recommended Kamekona to come in to play Sato because he had seen him deliver what he considered to be a very strong performance in his debut stage appearance in a play called Vanishing Shadows that was performed by the Hawaii Performing Arts Company in 1982. This film happened to mark Kamekona's debut feature performance, following a pretty lengthy career as a character actor on American television. Now, in reality, Kamekona had a very sweet-natured personality. You would never consider him a bad guy or gruff in any way. It very sharply contrasts with the surly crime boss character that he's portraying in Sato. Kamekona believed he was destined to play Sato because his grandfather was a Japanese samurai named Tokujiro Sato. Sato, who had emigrated to Hawaii and married a Hawaiian woman named Kalala Kamekona. They kept the Hawaiian name, but Sato theoretically should have been his last name. The physical demands of the performance were sometimes challenging to Kamekona. He's a big guy and not necessarily a karate master, so a scene where Sato attempts to break a board, that took 5 entire hours. There were a lot of challenges with getting the right camera angles. There were a lot of mishaps, miscues, and it only got worse when Kamekona started losing his voice from shouting "Kiai" at each take at the top of his lungs. Yuji Okamoto, he plays Chosen. He came in. He actually had karate skills. He was a brown belt coming in. Casting director Carol Jones, who had previously cast Okamoto in Better Off Dead, believed that he would be a good fit for the role. Initially, he suggested maybe he should slouch during the auditions because he was a tall guy, and he might appear too tall next to Ralph Macchio. But when he went through auditions, Avildsen was like, "Hey, what's going on? Why are you slouching so much? Stand up straight and strike a more formidable presence. You need to be somebody who would be considered intimidating," actually, to Daniel. Now, Ralph Macchio and Yuji Okamoto kind of stretching the believability of teenagers in the film because Macchio was 24, Okamoto was 26 years old at the time. And Macchio did have some frustration there that he had to remain like a 16 or 17-year-old because in these sequels, because he wanted to expand his performance and grow and mature, but the studio insisted that this was all set around the same time. He had to keep his youthful innocence. Bill Conti also returned to compose the score for Karate Kid Part 2. He did regret somewhat that he didn't have Zamfir's pan flute accompaniment this time out, because he felt it would be even more fitting with a lot of the scoring for the Okinawa scenes. But in addition to the pop soundtrack that they created for the movie, the song entitled Fascination is also featured. A scene where Chosen is surfing the radio in his car. It happens to be the same song that Daniel and Allie danced to in the first film at the country club. Perhaps not coincidentally, though, producer Jerry Weintraub's wife, Jane Morgan, she did a cover of Fascination in 1957, and it became her signature song because it spent 29 weeks on the pop charts. So this really was an homage to Weintraub, the producer, toward his wife, Jane Morgan. Additionally, the music that's kind of set in the 50s style diner between Daniel and Kumiko is Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets, which happened to be used as the theme song for the TV show Happy Days during its first 2 seasons, before they created the Happy Days theme song that we also know growing up. And of course, those seasons were the seasons where Pat Morita was a recurring cast member. Karate Kid Part 2 is very notable for showcasing bone dancing or obone dancing or bone adori, this ritual in the Japanese Buddhist tradition that honors the deceased ancestors. During the Obon Festival, people gather at temples to celebrate with music and dance for one night or maybe several days. They are dressed in traditional attire, kimonos, yukata. Participants dance in circles to the rhythm of these taiko drums, surrounded by glowing lanterns all around them. And the ritual happened to be taking place at the time that they were coming up with ideas for Karate Kid Part 2 at the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center, JACCC. They featured a circle of 1,000 dancers at this Obon Festival there in Los Angeles. And the organizers of the film said they wanted to showcase this very vibrant celebration to be part of the grand finale for the Karate Kid Part 2. In that festival, there was a new song called Yuyo, meaning just dance in Japanese, that was composed for that celebration. It was the first song composed in English specifically for Obon festivals in Southern California. So to facilitate putting this into the movie, they contacted Yuiyo's composer and the choreographer, Nobuko Miyamoto, to meet with Alvinson and the producers for recreating this for the big screen. Now, Miyamoto prioritized authenticity. She wanted to feature 300 community Obon dancers in their traditional attire, traditional music, those real musicians and taiko drummers, instead of hiring professional performers to come in. She hired Jose de Vega and Luis Kawabata Mita to help her with the project. However, when it came time to film, the producers said that they wanted the dancers to perform to a click track instead of Yuyo that they had been practicing with all along, because Bill Conti wanted to overlay his music as he was right to do per his contract. Miyamoto, though, stood up and asserted that if the traditional music were not used for this Obon dance, they would have to find somebody else to help them, and they would have no further participation from any of the dancers because they backed Miyamoto up. After several days of discussions, the producers finally relented, and they agreed that they would incorporate the traditional music from Miyamoto. Now, as far as other traditions, Robert Mark Kamen, he learned the Denden Daiko drum technique, the one where you spin the drum back and forth with these beads that hit the drum as you turn it, from Shokei Kishaba, who happened to be a Shorei-ryu karate practitioner that he knew, and he used it as a metaphor for karate. When Kamen had asked him about what was the essence of karate, Kishaba twirled the drum that created this rhythmic sound with the beads and said, "This is the essence of karate." He explained that deflecting an attack is circular with your body, and you can use your opponent's energy against them, just like this drum. Some publicity came their way when Vice President George Bush, or George H.W. Bush, as well as Second Lady Barbara Bush, visited the set for about 40 minutes. They created a landing pad nearby for his Black Hawk helicopter to land. The reason why he visited was because George and Barbara Bush were close friends with producer Jerry Weintraub, as well as his wife Jane Morgan, and they were big fans of the first film. They had seen the original film 5 times with various members of their family and their grandchildren. In fact, they watched this movie with one of their grandsons, George P. Bush, one of the sons of Jeb Bush. because he was very much wrapped up with the Karate Kid, and it taught him the importance of perseverance in the things he set out to do. For instance, he wanted to learn how to row a boat, and he was having a hard time, and he watched the Karate Kid, and it gave him the inspiration to continue working at it until he could master it. The Karate Kid Part 2, when it was released, it did carry some mixed reviews, but generally mixed to positive. It was a top 5 box office hit for the entirety of 1986, though. It was a huge hit in the box office. It topped the U.S. box office for 4 straight weeks, and then went on to gross over $115 million in 1986. That was about $25 million more than the original Karate Kid film did. And this increased popularity, I guess you could say that the home video release of the first film helped it somewhat, as well as showings on cable. People were pretty amped up to see more of the Daniel and Miyagi story. The storyline, though, also expanded here for Part 2 because it appealed to older audiences because it concentrated a lot on Miyagi and people of his generation. And it also opened up to women because there was a romantic subplot for both Miyagi and Daniel's story. And it also carried a popular soundtrack. In fact, Peter Cetera's hit Glory of Love topped the charts and went on to get nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song. It was a huge hit for Peter Cetera in 1986. Interestingly, though, this was a song that was not even intended to be in Karate Kid Part 2. It was written to be in Rocky 4, but it was one of those songs that was rejected by Sylvester Stallone, so they happily took it off of his hands and put it on the soundtrack, and they sold millions of singles. As far as what I think about Karate Kid Part 2, I would say it does lack the charm, I think, of the first installment. I feel like it's more mechanized here. There's more predictability in the way that the plot twists. It's a little bit slower paced. There's a somber tone here. I do think that there's a gentleness and a romantic idealism that does make it difficult to dislike Karate Kid Part 2 outright, even though there's a hackneyed quality to it. I do think, if I want to commend it, it shifts its focus to adult characters instead of teenagers. That's something that was a little bit bold for it to do. And the romance subplot involving Daniel, I think, is handled here with a lot more thoughtfulness in the way that he and Kumiko get along than the way that he and Ali were in the first film. I think it's more of a sweet love story for Part 2 that works actually even better as a romance. The villains, though, I think are the biggest problem when it comes to Karate Kid Part 2 because they seem very cartoonish. Like the actors sometimes are acting as if they're voicing children's animation instead of, voicing these Okinawan characters. There's a tendency here to sidestep the language that the Okinawans are supposed to use, whether it's Japanese or some of the more local flavor language that they're supposed to speak there. Okinawans speak to each other in poorly phrased English instead of in their native. Even when they're speaking to each other, it just doesn't make sense. And that's because primarily, this is a Hollywood movie, so it's going to try to attract primarily American audiences, and they don't want to read subtitles, so they have to speak in this English. It doesn't really make sense instead of in their native tongue. So, these are the contrivances they put into the film. So you have to swallow a lot of artistic license that they take in order to make this film function. You can see where it's going all along. There's not a lot of real surprises here. But that change of pace, that change of location, that change of attitude, and of course, it's nice to see Macchio and Morita again in the roles that ended up defining their careers to a large extent. So all in all, I will give a pass to Karate Kid Part 2 because I do like it. Maybe it's not what I would consider to be an out-and-out good movie, but it is a likable movie. One that I would recommend to people who really enjoy the first film and want to see more. I would say give it a try. So for that, I will give Karate Kid Part 2 3 stars on my scale. Means that I think it is worthwhile for those people who like this kind of movie, which is a sequel to a film that they were fond of the first time out. It is formulaic, to be sure, but the first film was already formulaic. I think the first film was a better film because the characterizations were still very good and very rounded and believable, and you like the characters much more in the first film, whereas in the second film, the new characters that they bring in are very much idealized and stereotyped and whatnot. Kumiko, I think Tanlyn Tomita as Kumiko, I think that was the right casting choice, and I think she actually delivers a pretty good performance for the limited amount of dialogue she's given. But, the rest of them are on the level of either cartoonish or they're just one-dimensional in some respects. So the characters don't add as much, and a lot of our love for Mr. Miyagi as well as Daniel-san is because we like them so much in the first film and we're carrying those feelings over. So for all of that, I can only give The Karate Kid Part 2 3 stars out of 4. If you have your own thoughts about The Karate Kid Part 2 that you want to impart, maybe you like it more, maybe you like it less than I do, you can write to me and let me know what you think. You can find my contact information at my website. That's at quipster.net, QWIPSTER.net. There are also links to my social media accounts as well, if you want to follow me on any of the social media platforms that I appear. On occasion, I'll write something that I forgot to put into this episode, or maybe just didn't have time to cover on one of my social media pages. So sometimes it is worth following me there just to catch those little tidbits out. As far as what I'm going to be covering on the next episode, well, of course, I'm going to be continuing on, finishing out the Karate Kid trilogy, the trilogy that features Daniel anyway, although this movie that comes out this year is actually continuing with Daniel as well. But to continue on with the Karate Kid trilogy with Karate Kid Part 3 and kind of the more forgotten of the Karate Kid films from the 1980s for a variety of reasons, and I'll get into the reasons why. A lot of people kind of tended to overlook Karate Kid Part 3, including the actors that appeared in it for quite a long time, even though now they embrace it because a lot of the characters in 3 ended up appearing in the Cobra Kai series as well. So it's kind of been embraced, I think, as part of the overall Cobra Kai Karate Kid mythology, which is why people are giving it a second look today. So check that out for next episode, Karate Kid Part 3 from 1989. If you haven't seen it before, if you haven't seen it in a while, I do encourage you to check that out before you listen to the review. And until next time, thank you, everyone, for listening and continuing to join me around the world in 80s movies.